Dignitaries on the dais, ladies and gentlemen. நான் தமிழ் கலந்த ஆங்கிலத்தில் பேச போறேன், mostly ஆங்கிலம், because the subject is a little technical. No man can serve two masters is a biblical saying. The full quotation is, no man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be devoted to one and despise the other. Saint Matthew. Now, unfortunately, the state universities in India have not two masters but three masters. One is the state government, of course. They depend on the state government for funds, land, and all other kinds of support. The second is the governor, who in his capacity as chancellor of the universities is the head of the university. Many people think that the governor has been designated chancellor in order to insulate universities from politics, and that this is a constitutional provision. Not true. Governor became chancellor of universities because of a colonial era decision. I'll come to that later. So this is a colonial British era relic, and whereas our governments always keep talking about decolonizing the country, this is one colonial era relic that they don't want to dismantle. I'll come to that also later. The third, boss, so to say, with inverted commas, of state universities is UGC. You all know the story of the camel in the Arab's tent, I suppose. The camel, ஒட்டகம், இந்த டென்ட்டுக்குள்ளே சும்மா ஒரு குளிராக இருக்குது, மூக்கை மட்டும் உள்ளே விட்டுறான்னு சொல்லுது, அப்புறம் மெதுவாக மூஞ்ச விட்டது, அப்புறம் உடம்பு வந்தது, அப்புறம் முழு கேமலும் உள்ளே வந்த மாதிரி யூஜிசி கதையும் அதே மாதிரி தான். Like the camel in the Arab tent, the UGC has been over the years making a large number of intrusive regulations, voluminous regulations, and it has effectively reduced universities to the status of affiliated colleges. The UGC's mandate is to coordinate and maintain minimum academic standards. அதுக்கு சம்பந்தமான regulations போட்டால் யாரும் ப்ராப்ளம் இல்லை. Instead, if you read the UGC regulations, barely 10% proper will be academic regulations. 90% will be about administrative matters, governance matters, pay scales, leave, increments, age of superannuation, pension, all kinds of things. These are not, these are beyond UGC's habit, but most of their regulations are like this. Now the question that arises is, are all UGC regulations binding, or only UGC's academic regulations binding? This again a point, I'll come to it later. So as I said, there are three types of, state universities have not one masters, but three masters. And this is not a very happy arrangement. Now this shows the number of universities and colleges in India. At the time of independence in 1947, India had just 20 universities and 496 colleges. Now we have something like 51,000 colleges and 1,400 universities, and the numbers are going up and up. Now if the university wants to nominate it for each of the universities in the country, it has to nominate something like 1,400 nominees as of today. Maybe the same person can be for more than one university, but இதே தான் பாதி வேலை இந்த யூஜிசியில் உட்காந்து அகடமிக் ரெகுலேஷன்ஸ் இல்லாமல் இந்த எந்த யூனிவர்சிட்டிக்கு யாரை நாமினேட் பண்ணலாங்கிற இந்த வேலை தான் நம்ம பண்ணிட்டு உட்காந்துருக்கோம். பிகாஸ் த நம்பர்ஸ் ஆஃப் யூனிவர்சிட்டிஸ் ஆர் க்ரோயிங் இயர் ஆஃப்டர் இயர். Now this shows the breakup of universities in India. Till last year, state public universities were the single largest component. But from this year onwards, state private universities have overtaken state public universities. Whether this is a good thing or a bad thing is a subject for another debate, another talk. I will not go into that. But one thing is definite. States are not spending as much on public universities as they should be doing. And I don't fully blame the states in this regard, because state universities are not fully under the control of state governments. நான் எதுக்கு பணம் செலவு பண்ணி அப்புறம் கவர்னர் அதை அந்த ஸ்டேட்ஸ் யூனிவர்சிட்டிஸ் நடத்தி போகிறதுனா நாங்கள் எதுக்கு செலவு பண்ணணும் அப்படிங்கிற ஒரு ஸ்டெப் முதலி ட்ரீட்மெண்ட் கொடுக்குற ஒரு மனப்பான்மை ஸ்டேட்ஸ்க்கு கிட்ட இருக்கு. ஒன் ஆஃப் த ரீசன்ஸ் வை ஸ்டேட்ஸ் ஆர் நெக்லெக்டிங் ஹையர் எஜுகேஷன். ஓகே, now this is a very interesting table. Though we have a lot of universities, as you know, quantity doesn't mean quality. Our universities, including our institutions of national importance such as IITs, IIMs, Indian Institute of Science, are nowhere, as when you consider global rankings. Now there are two types of global rankings. One is called the Times Higher Education Rankings 2025. Another is the QS Rankings 2025. வருஷம் இந்த rankings வரும். Times Higher Education Rankings நீங்க பாத்தீங்கன்னா USA has the largest number. I am talking only in the top 200 ranksல. I mean நிறைய rank இருக்கு, 600, 500, 1000 வரைக்கும் போகும். Top 200 rankல USA has got 55 universities or institutes as per Times Higher Education Ranking and 38 as per QS Rankings. UK 25, 27, Australia 10, 15, Canada 8, 11, Germany 29, Japan 5, 10, India 0, 2. Okay, and the our countries, the our countries, they contribute nearly 120 of the 200 top ranks. Top 200 ranks, 120 are from these 6 countries. In the Times Higher Education, like one Indian university or institute kuda illa. Indian Institute of Science Bangalore figures in ranking. They group it after 200. In 200, the group 201 to 250, Indian Institute of Science figures first. Anna University, I think, figures somewhere between 401 and 500. Okay. In the QS rankings, there are only 2 Indian universities or institutes. One is IIT Bombay 118 and IIT Delhi 150. Indian Institute of Science is from 211. IIT Madras is quite below. So what does this show? நீ இவ்வளவு நெருக்கி பிடிச்சி எல்லாரையும் பிடிச்சி இவ்வளவு வால்யூம்னஸ் அகாடமிக் ரெகுலேஷனை போட்டு தமிழை சொல்றதுல நீ என்ன கிழிச்சேன்னு சொல்லலாம். நீ ஒண்ணுமே பண்ண கிடையாது. So there is definitely a problem here. Okay. Now, if you look at the university systems that these 6 countries have, the universities there enjoy a lot of autonomy. They enjoy a lot of autonomy. For example, in the universities of Oxford, Cambridge, and Edinburgh, and many others also, the chancellor is usually a respected figure, public figure, not necessarily an academician, but a respected public figure. He is elected by the university bodies and by the alumni. All Oxford University alumni, wherever they may be, they vote. The idea is alumni have a vested interest, they have a stake in the university. இப்போ நீங்கள் மெட்ராஸ் யூனிவர்சிட்டியில் படித்தவரானா நம்ம யூனிவர்சிட்டி நல்லா பண்ணணுங்கிற ஒரு எண்ணம் உங்களுக்கு இருக்கும். So the chancellors of Oxford, Cambridge, and Edinburgh universities are elected by the university bodies and by the alumni associations. The chancellors of universities like Birmingham, Leeds, they are appointed by the executive council or the syndicate or governing body, board of governors. They are appointed. For Periyala Pathi, they are appointed. Complete freedom is given to the universities. Okay. Similarly with vice chancellors. Vice chancellors are called presidents in some countries. In USA, Canada, vice chancellor is called president. In Australia, in the other countries, they are called vice chancellors. Vice chancellors are also appointed by the executive council or board of governors. Now, Indian universities, only the vice chancellor is appointed from outside. He is either appointed by the president in the case of central universities or appointed by the governor in the case of state universities. All other officers, staff of the university are appointed by the executive council. அங்க என்ன பண்றான், vice chancellor கூட is appointed by the executive council and they don't seem to be any the worse for it. They're all doing quite fine. Okay. Now people will say அதெல்லாம் நம்ம ஊருக்கு சரியா வராதுங்க, இங்க ஒரே சொதப்பிடுவானுங்க. Our universities are quite old. Madras University started in 1857. When will you grow up? I mean, you must have heard the story of Peter Pan, the boy who never grew up. நம்ம யூனிவர்சிட்டிஸ் எல்லாம் Peter Pan மாதிரி. They just don't seem to grow up. And we don't want to give them the freedom also. Now, I'll just give you a small example. Madras University, for example, the search committee for selection of Vice Chancellor, there are 3 nominees. One nominee of the Chancellor, one nominee of the syndicate, one nominee of the Senate. Okay? I think this nominee of the Chancellor is wrong. Yeah, Chancellor தான் appoint பண்ண போறாரு. அவரே ஒரு நாமினி போட்டுக்கிட்டா, நான் இப்போ ஒரு ப்ரொஃபஸர், நான் தான் சான்சலர்னு வச்சுக்கோங்க, ப்ரொஃபஸர் கருணானந்தம்மா விசியாக கொண்டு வரணும்னு நான் முடிவு பண்ணிட்டேன். நான் அதுக்கு தகுந்த மாதிரி நம்ம ஞான ராஜசேகரனை என்னோட நாமினியாக போட்டுக்குவேன். அவர்கிட்ட சொல்லுவேன், கருணானந்தம் பேர் தான் நீ ரெக்கமெண்ட் பண்ணணும். மற்ற 2 பேர் என்ன பேர் வேணால் ரெக்கமெண்ட் பண்ணிட்டு போட எனக்கு கவலை இல்லை. நான் ஐ சூஸ் ஒன்லி கருணானந்தம். ஸோ த பர்சன் ஹூ இஸ் மேக்கிங் த அல்டிமேட் சாய்ஸ், ஹீ ஷுட் ஹேவ் எ நாமினி. அதே தப்பு. சான்சலர் ஷுட் நாட் ஹேவ் எ நாமினி. ஓகே? ஸோ இப்போ இருக்கிற சிஸ்டம் சான்சலர்ஸ் நாமினி, சிண்டிகேட் நாமினி அண்ட் செனட் நாமினி. இப்போ முந்திரி கொட்டை மாதிரி நம்ம யூஜிசி உள்ள வந்துட்டு அந்த செனட் நாமினி டிஸ்பிளேஸ் பண்ணி யூஜிசி நாமினி அங்கே சேர்த்து அப்படின்னா இதில் என்ன ஆகும்? சென்ட்ரல் கவர்மெண்ட் இன்டைரக்ட்லி வில் ஹேவ் 2 nominees, one through the chancellor, one through the UGC. State has no nominee, and if you call syndicate nominee as a state nominee, state has only 1 nominee. That's what the controversy about the UGC regulation is all about. Now, this is Tamil Nadu is comparatively better. West Bengal na paatha avanga universities la the search committee, will be shocked to know, consists of 5 members, 1 nominee of the chancellor, that is governor, 1 nominee of the chief minister, 1 nominee of the state government, chief minister illama state government or nominee, 1 nominee of the UGC and 1 nominee of the state council of higher education. 5 பேருமே அவங்க தான். ஒரு nominee கூட from the university body கிடையாது. Now, this is not a system which is conducive to academic independence, academic autonomy or academic freedom, academic growth. இந்த மாதிரி எல்லாம் வச்சுட்டு பண்ண முடியும். So, the point I'm trying to say is, நம்ம UGC regulations நம்ம எதிர்க்கணும். கண்டிப்பா this 2025 UGC draft regulations are atrocious according to me. They have to be opposed. But we should be clearer of our larger goal. The larger goal, I'll explain why, is first, governor should not continue as chancellor. Second, in the selection committee, search committee, there should be more and more representation for university bodies, as in Oxford, Cambridge, Melbourne, Harvard, and less representation for other fellows, outsiders. These are the 2 larger goals that we should move towards. சும்மா the UGC 10th draft பற்றியே பேசுனீங்கன்னா நீங்கள் அந்த பெரிய கோலை மறந்த மாதிரி ஆகும். ஓகே? ஓகே. Now, the first question is, should governors be chancellors of universities? உங்களுக்கெல்லாம் தெரியும், the first 3 universities were established in 1857 by the British at Calcutta, Bombay and Madras. That time, there was a British governor ruling each of these presidencies. The British made the governor the ex officio chancellor of these universities, not to give them autonomy, but to keep them firmly under the government's control. Okay? As chancellor, the British governor could appoint vice chancellors. He could nominate certain number of members to the syndicate and other university bodies. It was his duty to approve the subordinate legislation or delegate legislation. I'll come to that point later. He had to approve that, and he used to preside over the convocation. That is, he had a full grip. Okay? Now, independence ka problem. When you are a democracy and a federal country, this model of governor as chancellor should have been given up. நம்ம ஆளுங்க அதில் கோட்டை விட்டாங்க. One reason for this was, from 1947 to 1967, Congress was in power both in the center and the states. CMs were all powerful, governors were only ceremonial figures. So they didn't really feel the impetus or the urgency to amend the university acts to make somebody else the chancellor in the place of governor. சரி இருந்துட்டு போட்டோமே, கவர்னர் தான் சும்மா இருக்காரு அப்படி வச்சுட்டோம். But 67க்கு அப்புறம், after 1967, the political landscape in India changed, as you all know. The ruling party or coalition in the center was often different from the parties ruling in the various states. So friction between center and states became common. The governor, instead of being an impartial constitutional functionary, he increasingly became a political agent of the center. I'm talking about all put, I mean, I'm not talking about now or this one. This has been the case throughout, right from 1967. Okay. So, 67 governors started interfering more and more in, and the universities became the playground or the battleground where these skirmishes took place. Skirmishes between state governments and governors. Now, as I said, many people, even now today, I had written an article which came in the Hindu today. One of my batchmates said, I don't agree with you. நீங்கள் ஸ்டேட் கவர்மெண்ட் கிட்ட விட்டீங்கன்னா பாலிடிக்ஸ் ஜாஸ்தியாயிரும், கவர்னர் கிட்ட இருக்கிறது தான் கரெக்ட். ஐ செட் எந்த உலகத்திலே என்ன இருக்கு? Who told you that governor is not a politician? You know? In fact, in 1966, Government of India appointed the first Administrative Reforms Commission. One of the findings in that Administrative Reforms Commission, this is Government of India's own commission, mind you. One of the findings of that Administrative Reforms Commission was that the quality of governors is dipping very rapidly. Qualification is prescribed பண்ணல நம்ம. கண்டவெல்லாம் governor ஆயிட்டு வரான். And they said that defeated politicians எல்லாம் governor பண்றப்போ அந்த ஆஃபீஸரோட dignity குறையுது. This is the finding of the first Administrative Reforms Commission of the Government of India itself. Then in 1983, Government of India appointed the Sarkaria Commission on Center-State Relations. All of you have heard about it. The Sarkaria Commissions did a study and it found that 60% of the governors were politicians, active politicians. And some of them had been active just before the governor's posting also. Chief Minister Then it said that there's been a steep decline in the quality of governors after the Nehru era. This was the finding of Sarkaria Commission. Then a gentleman called Professor Ashok Pankaj, he did a study of governors over a period of 65 years, from 1950 to 2015. And he found that 52% were hardcore politicians, 26% were administrators, retired bureaucrats. Remaining 22% less, some were, academics, some were judges, some were military people and others. And he said, even the remaining of the ex-bureaucrats and judges, ruling party at the center, so Ashok Pankaj said the quality of governance is falling. They are playing a lot of politics and this institution has become highly politicized. So the argument that governors protect universities or shield universities from politics is not correct. Because this is Government of India's own reports saying that. Okay, many people are slightly confused about this. The governor has two roles. One, his role as governor. There, as per Article 163(1) of the Constitution, he is supposed to act on the aid and advice of the State Cabinet or Council of Ministers. There is a second role of the governor, that is as Chancellor. This role is, as I said, is not from the Constitution, it is from the State University Acts only. In the role, the cabinet or page, for example, as Chancellor of Madras University or Madurai University, is the governor supposed to act as per the advice of the Council of Ministers? This is the question. Supreme Court has said no. As a statutory functionary, he is independent. He can act in his own discretion. Unless the statute says, he is free to act in his own discretion. That's what the thing said. இப்படி ஒரு ரூலிங் வந்ததுக்கு அப்புறம் நம்ம ஆளுங்க என்ன நினைச்சாங்க, இனிமேல நம்மளை பிடிக்கிறதுக்கு யாருமே இல்லை அப்படி சொல்லி they have been bypassing the state government completely. They appoint the vice chancellors of their choice. Of course, where the ruling party, same party இருந்தால் கொஞ்சம் பயப்படுவாங்க. Or if they appoint their own people, they nominate their own people to the university bodies. So this problem is there. Now in the dual role of governor, there are many problems. You all know this. One is governor has power without accountability. He wields a lot of power but has no accountability. State government is funding the universities, but this is almost like an independent fiefdom. Lacks academic expertise. Most of the governors don't have the academic expertise to run or guide educational institutions. Non-transparent decision making. சுற்றி யாரோ ஒரு கோட்டரி இருக்கும், அவங்க ஐடியா கொடுப்பாங்க, இப்படி பண்ணுங்க தலைவர், அப்படி பண்ணுங்க அப்படிம்பாங்க, அதுபடி பண்ணிருப்பாங்க. Political interference of another kind. Of course, states' political interference may be reduced, but the governor introduces political interference of his own kind. Administrative paralysis. We have seen it. 6 universities out of the 20 universities in Tamil Nadu are headless today for more than a year. Many faculty posts are vacant. Students are not getting their degrees. All sorts of problems. Undermines university autonomy, undermines federalism. State universities should be fully accountable to elected state government. Whatever, I'm not saying that state government is good or state education ministers are good. They may play politics, whatever may be the case. In a democracy, politics cannot be avoided. Good or bad, state universities should be accountable only to the state governments. Now, insights from past commissions. As you know, Rajamannar committee was appointed by Kalaignar in 1969. அந்த கமிட்டியில் என்ன சொன்னாங்கன்னா, இந்த ஸ்டாட்யூட்டரி ஃபங்க்ஷன் என்ன பாருங்க, சான்சலர் மாதிரி ஃபங்க்ஷன்ஸ் ஆல்சோ தே ஷுட் ஆக்ட் ஒன்லி ஆஸ் பர் த அட்வைஸ் ஆஃப் த கவுன்சில் ஆஃப் மினிஸ்டர், பட் சுப்ரீம் கோர்ட் டிட் அக்ரி. நெக்ஸ்ட் இஸ் சர்க்காரியா கமிஷன். ஐ ஆல்ரெடி டோல்ட் யூ அபவுட் இட். சர்க்காரியா கமிஷன் ரொம்ப இன்னும் டச் பண்ணல. தே ஒன்லி செட் அட்வைஸ் கொடுத்தானுங்க. கவர்னர், தோ யூ கேன் ஆக்ட் இண்டிபெண்டன்ட்லி, இட் இஸ் பெட்டர் தன் யூ கன்சல்ட் வித் த சீஃப் மினிஸ்டர் இன் த ஸ்டேட். அவ்வளோதான் சொன்னாங்க. தென் MM Punchi Commission appointed in 2007 by the UPA 1 government. MM Punchi Commission said கவர்னருக்கு இந்த யூனிவர்சிட்டி சான்சலர் இந்த வேலையெல்லாம் கொடுக்கக்கூடாது. Let governor focus only on his constitutional roles. Appoint somebody, a very eminent academician or a very eminent public figure as chancellor. That's a good suggestion actually. Now the question is, what are the alternative modes? The governor chancellor relative, who will be the chancellor? That's the question. The global best practice is that the governor is an eminent public figure, provides ceremonial leadership, has no executive authority, acts as institutional ambassador, presides over convocations. That is, not all universities have this system of chancellor. The British and Australian, Canadian, and the மாதிரி இதெல்லாம் இருக்கு. எங்கெல்லாம் சான்சலர் பதவி இருக்கோ அங்கெல்லாம் the chancellor is only ceremonial head. இந்தியாவில் மட்டும்தான் the chancellor is so powerful. Because the colonial era legislation நம்ம இன்னி வரைக்கும் இதை பண்ணல. So there are 5 alternative models. One is governor as ceremonial chancellor. அவர் discretional act பண்ணலாங்கிற அந்த இதை எடுத்து சட்டத்தை திருத்தி make it mandatory for the governor to act as per the council of ministers. Now you will be surprised to know 3 states have already done it. Gujarat did it way back in 1978. Karnataka did it in 2000. And Maharashtra did it in 2021. Second is Chief Minister's Chancellor. I personally don't think it's a good idea. But West Bengal in 2023 and Punjab 2023, they passed bills, but the president, awaiting presidential assent. Then Tamil Nadu passed a curious bill saying government will be the chancellor. I don't know how government can be chancellor, how government can preside over convocations. I don't understand that. But anyway, that's also awaiting assent. Next model is state government will appoint some chancellor other than governor. Telangana has done it. The Chandrasekhar Rao, maybe he has in good terms with the center at the time, amendment. So Telangana, the state government can appoint the chancellor. Kerala assembly passed a similar bill in 2022. In fact, Kerala bill is quite good. It says the chancellor shall be an eminent academician or public figure and வார்த்தை இருக்கு. Whereas Telangana அந்த வார்த்தை இல்லை, யாரை வேணா தெலுங்கானா போட்டுக்கலாம். Still, they have not given the president has not given the assent for chancellor in up to the Kerala's bill. Then the other 2 models I already told you. Chancellor elected by university bodies, like Oxford, Cambridge, and Edinburgh. Chancellor appointed by University's Executive Council, UK, Birmingham, Leeds, Canada, McGill, British Columbia, Australia, Melbourne, Australian National University. Chancellor is appointed by the syndicate, the Executive Council. So what is the way forward? I find that because I've been associated with universities right from between 89 and 91, I was registrar of Madras University. And then I was also Director of Collegiate Education for some time. Later I became Vice Chancellor of a Central University. But I have never once heard the teaching associations, நிறைய கோரிக்கை வைப்பாங்க. கவர்னரை இந்த பதவியிலிருந்து தூக்கி சான்சலர் பதவியிலிருந்து தூக்குங்கன்னு சொல்லி இவங்க சொன்னது ஒரு வாட்டி கூட நான் கேட்டதில்லை. ஐ டோன்ட் நோ, ஐ மே பி மிஸ்டேக்கன், பட் ஐ நாட் ஹர்ட். நான் உங்களை தூண்டி விடுறேன்னு நினைக்காதீங்க. நீங்க என்ன உங்களுக்கு எது கரெக்ட்னு தோணுதோ அதை பண்ணுங்க. பட் இன் மை ஒப்பீனியன், கவர்னர் ஷுட் நாட் பி chancellor. It's a colonial era relic. It should be dismantled. Next point is, President of India and Government of India should be impartial. Now, Telangana bill-க்கு நீங்க கையெழுத்து போடுறீங்க 2015ல, மகாராஷ்டிரா பில்லுக்கு 2021ல கையெழுத்து போடுறீங்க. அதுக்கு முன்னால குஜராத் 78ல வாங்கிட்டான். அந்த சீஃப் மினிஸ்டர் யார் அந்த கட்டிக்காரன்னு எனக்கு தெரியாது, கண்டுபிடிக்கணும். 78ல குஜராத்ல மாத்திக்கிட்டாங்க. கர்நாடகாவில் 2000ல கையெழுத்து வாங்கிட்டாங்க. Why are you keeping the bills of Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, Punjab and Kerala pending? I'm not fully satisfied with the Punjab model or the West Bengal model or even the Tamil Nadu model, but I still maintain the states have the right to experiment with whatever models they want. I mean, the president should be signing it. Of course, there is a procedure. Article 131 படி Supreme Courtல கேஸ் போடலாம். சுப்ரீம் கோர்ட்ல கேஸ் போட்டால் இந்த கேஸ் எப்போ முடியும் அதனால உங்களுக்கு தெரியும், உங்களுக்கு தெரியாது, எனக்கு தெரியாது. பட் ஸோ globally, when chancellor is only a ceremonial figure, நம்ம மட்டும் எதுக்கு இந்த மாதிரி chancellor வச்சிருக்கோம் point. So this is the first reform that we need. The second reform, and which is at the root of all our problems today, is UGC regulations can they override state university acts. UGC seems to think so. Government of India seems to think so. Supreme Court sometime back didn't think so, but recently, in the last few years, Supreme Court seems to think so. So there is a lot of confusion about this. Okay. Now you must understand this issue because idu purinjikama nama further pesi prayatham illa. So I would like to go into some legal matters. Bayapadadinga, very simple issues. First, of course, as you know, எல்லாத்துக்கு மேல இருக்கிறது Constitution of India. Constitution of India is supreme. Below the Constitution, you have what are called laws, or acts, legislation, statutes. As per the Constitution, in the 7th schedule, there are 3 lists. Union list, where Parliament alone can legislate. State list, where the state alone can legislate. And concurrent list, where both the Parliament and the state can legislate. If there is a conflict, then parliamentary law will override the state law. Okay. Now there is another funda called delegated legislation or subordinate legislation. That is, Parliament meets only about 100 days in a year, and as you know, it may not always function. Parliament cannot look into every aspect. So what happens when the laws are passed is not just in India, worldwide. The acts and statutes or laws, they are only like the skeleton of a body. Parliament or a broad outline da kudukum. The flesh and blood and nerves and all are filled up by the delegated legislation that is done by the government. Central rules, central delegated legislation is done by the central government. State delegated legislation is done by the state government. Now, this is what you call a necessary evil, because Parliament cannot be. If your Parliament tries to, go into every micro detail, then the act will be too long. Parliament will have to sit in session 365 days a year. No, it's not possible. So Parliament என்ன பண்ணுது? It gives the broad outlines and say மீடியாலாம் நீங்க பார்த்துக்கோங்க அப்படின்னு சொல்லி விட்டுருது. That is where the mischief arises. Then there's a doctrine called ultra virus. You might have heard about it. Ultra virus தமிழ்ல சொல்றதுனா அத்துமீறல், ஹிந்தியில சொல்றதுனா औकात के बाहर, இங்கிலீஷ்ல சொல்றதுனா above my pay grade அப்படின்னு சொல்ற மாதிரி. So quite often what happens, parliamentary laws confer some powers to make delegated legislation upon the central government or one of the central government agencies. Similarly, state legislature may confer some power. The governments or the agencies may misuse the power. They may exceed their brief. That's what the UGC is doing right now. Now, what are the types of delegated legislation? One is called rules. Rules are made by the government departments. Next is regulations. Regulations are made by autonomous bodies, like for example UGC or SEBI or IRB, Insurance Regulatory Department. Then you have bylaws, usually municipalities bylaws. Then you have notifications, orders, exemptions. Anyway, the point is these are broadly the types of delegated legislation. Universities of Puerto Rico, the delegated legislation has got peculiar names. The professors here may know. They are called statutes, ordinances, and regulations. I mean, statute, confusing wording. Statutes, for example, when I was in the central universities, statutes are proposed by the executive council, but the president as visitor has to approve that. That is statute. Ordinances are framed by the executive council. President approval தேவையில்லை, but president நினைச்சா அதை குறிப்பிட்ட periodல cancel பண்ணலாம் or modify பண்ணலாம். Regulations are meant for academic purpose, PhD regulations இந்த மாதிரி. So these are the three types of regulations. In fact, I have a funny story to tell you. There is a parliamentary committee for delegated legislation that goes from town to town. It's an important committee. Their idea is to check whether rules have been framed for all the acts and whether the rules are exceeding the brief, going beyond the scope of the act. So, the Indian Maritime University comes under the Ministry of Shipping, Union Ministry of Shipping, not under the Education Ministry. So, அவங்களுக்கு இந்த யூனிவர்சிட்டி பற்றி நிறைய தெரியல. So, parliamentary committee பழைய மீட்டிங்ல they told them that நாங்கள் இன்னும் ரூல்ஸ் போடல, எங்களுக்கு கொஞ்சம் டைம் கொடுங்க அப்படின்னு சொன்னாங்க. ரூல்ஸ் போட்டாச்சு, நிறைய ஸ்டாட்யூட்ஸ் போட்டிருக்கு, நிறைய ஆர்டினன்சஸ் போட்டிருந்தது, ரெகுலேஷன் போட்டு, but they didn't realize that they are the rules, they are the delegated legislation. So when I went as Vice Chancellor, because I had already served as Registrar of Madras University, I knew this thing. The next meeting of the delegated legislation parliamentary committee, I told them, போட்டாச்சுங்க, எல்லாம் போட்டாச்சு. என்ன நீங்கள் இப்படி சொல்கிறீங்க, போடவே இல்லைங்கிறாங்க, நீங்கள் போட்டாச்சுங்கிறீங்க. I showed them, I said, in universities, we don't call them rules. We call them as statutes, ordinances and regulations. So that's how it happened. Now, after the delegated legislation is framed, it must be kept before the parliament. Whether it's the rules or regulations, it must be placed before the parliament. Parliament approve pannanum thevilla, it must be placed. There are three ways of placing it. One is called without further procedure. That is, the rules and regulations are placed only for information. No discussion takes place. Second is called negative resolution procedure. Rules and regulations are placed before the parliament for 30 days. யாராலும் objection இருந்தா சொல்லலாம். But usually it doesn't happen. Third is affirmative resolution procedure, where parliament ஒத்துக்கிட்டாதான் the rules will come into force. Now this is very important. I'll tell you why. Now let me briefly go into, the teachers here may be knowing it, but the rest of the audience may not know it. I'll quickly go into the UGC Act 1956. As I said, the purpose of UGC is to coordinate and determine standards in universities. Section 5 of the Act says the UGC will have 12 members, chairman, vice chairman, 10 members. Section 12D, this is important. It says UGC can recommend to any university the measures necessary for the improvement of university education and advise the university upon the action to be taken. The key words here are recommend and advise. Yeah, Actly என்ன சொல்லுதுன்னா UGC's decisions are only recommendatory, they are not mandatory. And the regulation இங்க போட்டு இது mandatory அப்படிங்கிறாங்க. And Supreme Court also has passed orders saying UGC regulations are mandatory. It goes against the Act. The regulations are ultra vires the Act. And section 14, அதில் என்ன சொல்றாங்கன்னா, if any university fails to comply with UGC's recommendations, UGC may withhold grant from the university. Suppose ஒரு university follow பண்ணலாம், உங்க எது நான் follow பண்ண முடியாது சொன்னா என்ன பண்ணலாம்? UGC can only withhold the grant. That's all the powers conferred. But confusion has been created by judgments of the Supreme Court, which have held that UGC regulations are mandatory. And the Act itself says it's not mandatory. I'll narrate two personal incidents of mine. எனக்கு இந்த இஷ்யூ அப்பே தெரியும். 89-91 ரெஜிஸ்ட்ரார் இருக்கப்போ one particular affiliated college in Chennai, I don't know how to name the college, they applied for autonomy. Normally granting autonomy is a long drawn process. It takes about 1 year. The syndicate has to give approval, state government has to give approval, UGC has to give approval, then it comes back to the syndicate. Whole thing takes 1 year. நீங்க அடுத்த வருஷம் வேணுமானா இந்த வருஷமே அப்ளை பண்ணணும். This particular principal applied in June, changed the syllabus. We moved pretty fast. The university granted the approval in July, state government in September, but unfortunately UGC ஒரு கொக்கி போட்டு திருப்பி விட்டான் நவம்பர்ல. So the matter came back. So in December when the syndicate met, syndicate said no, we can recommend but only from next year. Now this particular college and the principal are very influential. So she went and met the chairman UGC. And that gentleman wrote a letter to the vice chancellor saying, late ஆனல பரவாயில்ல நாங்க கொடுக்க தயாரா இருக்கோம் நீங்க அனுப்பிச்சீங்கன்னா நாங்க கொடுப்போம் இது அவனுக்கு வேண்டாத வேலை இந்த UGC. So this fellow writes a letter saying, no, it's not late. You people can send the proposal. We are willing to give. And he mischievously marks a copy of that letter to the principal. Okay. Now syndicate stood by its stand. They said, no, we are only recommending it for next year. Then this college goes to High Court, saying when the UGC is ready to give, why can't the university abide by it? Upon the case, Jaichan, I was the registrar, you fight the case. In the point, Jaichan. First point, that's a personal communication from the chairman. It is not the view of the UGC. View of the UGC must be all the 12 members sitting as a body and taking the decision. Even then, that is not an academic regulation. Even if it is an academic regulation, section 12D says it's only recommendatory. So in the moon argument, so High Court, we won the case that time. This is one, case number one. The second instance is where I personally was involved. I became Vice Chancellor of Indian Maritime University in 2014. And I didn't have a PhD, I didn't have 10 years of experience as a professor because I have been in the IAS. So somebody challenged my appointment saying he doesn't fulfill the UGC 2010 regulations. It said the Vice Chancellor should be a professor with 10 years experience and should have a PhD. So somebody challenged my appointment saying he doesn't fulfill the VC's qualifications. He doesn't have PhD, he doesn't have 10 years experience as a professor. So again we won the case. We won, we don't come under Ministry of Education, we come under Ministry of Shipping. Okay. But UGC's standards may apply to all universities, that we agree. Second, maximum, your 12D actually says only recommendatory, it is not mandatory. We don't accept your recommendation. I mean, this ministry doesn't accept your recommendation. Maximum, you can grant anyway, you can grant grant. This is the second point. Third point that we said was, look, maritime disciplines are different. Till the university was created, it had only undergraduate courses. There was a 1-year diploma course, a 3-year BSc Nautical Science course, and a 4-year BTech Marine Engineering. Only after the university came, we introduced PG courses and PhD. Now PG and PhD, 10 years experience with professor and chance. So this university is different. So we won the case. So as I said, this point I knew I had personal experience that UGC regulations are not binding in the personal experience. Now section 25, central government is empowered to make rules. As I said, rules are made by government, regulations are made by autonomous bodies like UGC or something. Section 26 says UGC can make regulations. Now UGC, there is no provision in the UGC Act talking about Vice Chancellors at all. Vice Chancellor பத்தி regulation போட்டது இவனுக்கு அதிகாரமே இல்லை. ஆனா இவன் துணிச்சலா போட்டிருக்கான். 2010 வரைக்கும் இவன் Vice Chancellor கிட்ட பக்கமே போல. ஏன்னா he knew that அவனுக்கு Vice Chancellor பத்தி போடுறதுக்கு அதிகாரம் இல்லை. Because the only 2 subsections by which he is claiming authority are 26E. UGC can define qualifications for university teaching staff subject wise. Vice Chancellor is not a teaching staff. He is an officer of the university. Either body. Then 26G. Either end side regulation போட்டான் 2010 வரைக்கும் பயந்துட்டு இருந்தான் போடல. But 2010 for the first time they introduced the regulation saying Vice Chancellor போட்டான். 2013 they withdrew it. 2018 மறுபடி போட்டான். இப்போ என்ன போட்டான்னா Vice Chancellorக்கு selection search committeeல எப்படி வேணா பண்ணிக்கோங்க ஆனா ஒரு நாமினி ஆஃப் UGC இருக்கணும் அப்படின்னு போட்டான். இப்போ 2025 3 மெம்பர்ஸ் தான் இருக்கணும். 1 nominee from Chancellor, 1 nominee from UGC, 1 nominee from syndicate or whatever. So they are changing their stance every 5 years and every 3 years. Okay. Now there is a famous case, University of Delhi versus Raj Singh, 1994, where the Supreme Court said UGC regulations are not. Na sonna point da. Nama case la famous agla. Adu court kuda agla. But this is didn't go to Supreme Court, High Court level mudijide. So in the case for example, University of Delhi versus Raj Singh, Delhi University challenged this national eligibility test regulations of the UGC where லெக்சரர் பதவிக்கு நீங்கள் அந்த டெஸ்ட் பாஸ் பண்ணால் தான் லெக்சரர் பதவிக்கு போகலாம். அப்போ சுப்ரீம் கோர்ட் என்ன சொல்கிறாங்கன்னா, these UGC's regulations are only recommendatory. They are not binding. If a university doesn't want to follow, fine. You will lose your grants. Grants போனால் பரவாயில்லன்னு சொன்னால் ஃபாலோ பண்ணாத. That's what the Supreme Court says. நீ அப்போ 94ல் அப்படி சொல்லிட்டு இப்போ அது பைண்டிங் சொன்னால் இட்ஸ் நாட் கரெக்ட். So that's what I am saying here. According to this Supreme Court judgment, UGC regulations are advisory, not mandatory. Universities can choose whether or not to follow them, albeit at risk of losing funding. This is what the Supreme Court itself said in 1994. Okay, now it's a constitutional question. The question is, can the regulations framed by 12 people sitting in the UGC office, who are the 12 people? The chairman, vice chairman, 10 members. In the 12 ஆசாமிங்க போடுற regulation, can it override the state university laws of 28 states? இப்போ எதுக்கு நீங்கள் ஸ்டேட் லெஜிஸ்லேட்டிவ் அசம்பிளியில் வச்சிருக்கீங்க, எதுக்கு இதெல்லாம் பண்ணுறோம்? இந்த 12 பேர் if they can override, the regulations framed by these people. So the question, this is the crux of the question. Okay, but this is part of a larger question. What is the larger question? The larger question deals with center-state relations. Can delegated legislation framed by union government and its agencies under a central law override the provisions of plenary state law? இது ஒரு நம்ம எஜுகேஷன் யூனிவர்சிட்டி அண்ட் எஜுகேஷன் மட்டும் இது இல்லை, இட்ஸ் வைடர் ரமிஃபிகேஷன்ஸ். பிகாஸ் கன்கரண்ட் லிஸ்ட்டில் என்னெல்லாம் சப்ஜெக்ட்ஸ் இருக்கோ அங்கெல்லாம் சென்ட்ரல் லா ஓவர் ரைடிங் ஸ்டேட் லா வி டோன்ட் மைண்ட். பார்லிமெண்ட் பாசஸ் a law and that overrides a state law, nobody has any objection. பார்லிமெண்ட் லால கேப்ஸை யூஸ் பண்ணி அந்த கேப்ஸில் இவங்க ஒரு ரெகுலேஷன் போட்டு, கேன் த சபார்டினேட் ஏஜென்சிஸ் கேன் தே ஃப்ரேம் ரெகுலேஷன்ஸ் which override state? This is the issue, crux of the issue. So article, that's what is called article 254(1) of the constitution, which simply says, in the list, the concurrent list, both center and state can legislate, but if the state's law conflicts with the center's law, central law will prevail. That's simple funda. Now there is a famous judgment called Tikaram G versus State of UP, 1956. This was about Essential Commodities Act, which comes under concurrent list. Central government law rules போடுறாங்க. Whether this rule can override the UP Sugarcane Act, UGC regulation, whether it can override Madras University Act. Similar question. Upper Supreme Court clearly says no. The power of repeal, if any, was vested in Parliament, and Parliament alone could exercise it by enacting an appropriate provision in regard thereto. Parliament could not delegate this power of repeal to any executive authority. Such delegation, if made, would be void. Supreme Court என்ன சொல்றாங்க? Parliament சட்டம் போட்டா பரவாயில்ல, but no executive agency can frame rules or regulations to override a state law. Next case is Indian Express Newspapers, Bombay versus Union of India, 1984. In this case, Supreme Court ruled subordinate legislation, as I told you, rules, regulations and all that, may be questioned on any of the grounds on which plenary legislation is questioned, plenary and primary law. In addition, it may also be questioned on the ground that it does not conform to the statute under which it is made. It may further be questioned on the ground that it is contrary to some other statute. That is because subordinate legislation must yield to plenary legislation. என்ன சொல்றாங்க, இப்போ நீங்க மோட்டார் வெஹிக்கிள்ஸ் ஆக்ட் இருக்கு, அது கீழே நீங்க மோட்டார் வெஹிக்கிள் ரூல்ஸ் போடுறீங்க. That motor vehicle rules should not conflict with the provisions of Motor Vehicles Act. It should not exceed its brief. அது மட்டும் இல்ல, வேற எந்த ஆக்டோடயோ அது மோதக்கூடாது. The rules framed under Motor Vehicles Act should not conflict with some other central act. It should not conflict with some other state act. That's what the thing says. Kerala Samsthana Chetu Tholilalis Union versus State of Kerala, 2006. In this case, Supreme Court ruled, a rule is not only required to be made in conformity with the provision of the act whereunder it is made, but the same must be in conformity with the provisions of any other act, as a subordinate legislation cannot be violative of any plenary legislation made by Parliament or legislation. Supreme Court itself has said that no rules or regulations framed by a central government agency or central government can override the plenary laws passed by state legislatures. The last case, JK Industries versus Union of India, 2007. Here, Supreme Court said subordinate legislation may be questioned on any of the grounds on which plenary legislation is questioned. In addition, it may also be questioned on the ground that it does not conform to the statute under which it is made. It may further be questioned on the ground that it is inconsistent with the provisions of the Act or that it is contrary to some other statute applicable on the same subject matter. Therefore, it has to yield to plenary legislation. That is, rules and regulations of the central government department or its agencies cannot clash with the Act, the parent Act, cannot clash with any other central act, cannot clash with the provisions of any other state act on the same subject. Which means UGC regulation cannot clash with the state university acts. But in the judgments பத்தியே சொல்லாம, see there's a term called per incuria. Per incuria சட்ட judges, see there's a phrase called ignorance of law excuses no man. உங்களுக்கு தெரியும், நீங்க தண்ணி போட்டு கார்ல போயிட்டு இருக்கீங்க, போலீஸ்காரன் பிடிக்கிறான், இப்படி தண்ணி போட்டு ஓட்டக்கூடாதுன்னு எனக்கு தெரியாதுங்க, யாரும் இது எனக்கு சொல்ல அப்படின்னு நீங்க சொல்ல முடியாது, என்ன இழுத்துட்டு போயிடும். ஸோ த ஜெனரல் பிரின்சிபல் இஸ் ignorance of law excuses no man. பட் அதுக்கு ஒரு எடிஷன் இருக்கு, ignorance of law excuses no man except the judge. So judges will simply say, sorry, this provision of law was not brought to our notice. இந்த மாதிரி ஒரு முன்னால ஒரு ஜட்மெண்ட் இருக்குன்னு சொல்லி nobody brought it to our notice. The other side lawyers இதெல்லாம் எங்க நோட்டீஸ் கொண்டு வந்தா நாங்க இது பண்ணுறோம். Maybe I'm saying it's possible that the lawyers didn't argue the case properly. They didn't bring all these past Supreme Court judgments. The Supreme Court 4 கேஸ் தப்பா போட்டான், ஆர்டர் போட்டான். ஃபர்ஸ்ட் தமிழ்நாட்டில் நம்ம ஆளுங்க தான் அந்த கோட்டை விட்டுருக்காங்க. ஃபர்ஸ்ட் 2009 Annamalai University versus Secretary Information and Tourism. I don't know how information tourism எப்படி போச்சு தெரியல, higher education இருக்குமா, but anyway 2009 State of West Bengal versus Anindya Sundar Das 2022, Gambhirdan K. Gadvi versus State of Gujarat 2022, Professor Srijit versus 2000. இந்த கேசஸ் நம்பிட்டு தான் நம்ம கவர்னரு இல்லைல்ல நீங்கள் யூஜிசி ரெகுலேஷன் போடணும், அதுபடி தான் போடணும்னு கவர்னர் சொல்லிட்டு இருக்காரு. ஸ்டேட் கவர்மெண்ட் இல்லைல்ல நாங்கள் போட மாட்டோம், எங்கள் சட்டம் தான் சொல்லணும்னு ஸ்டேட் கவர்மெண்ட் சொல்லிட்டு. இந்த இதில் என்ன ஆர்குமெண்ட் அவங்க கொடுக்குறாங்கன்னா, திஸ் இம்பார்ட்டன்ட் டு நோ, பிகாஸ் அவங்க என்ன சொல்றாங்க சுப்ரீம் கோர்ட்ல, even as per the UGC Act, every rule and regulation made under the said Act shall be laid before each House of Parliament. Therefore, being a subordinate legislation, UGC regulations become part of the Act. In case of any conflict between the state legislation and the central legislation shall prevail by applying the rule or principle of repugnancy as enunciated in Article 254. Therefore, any appointment as a Vice Chancellor contrary to the provisions of the UGC regulations can be said to be in violation of the statutory provision. 1994 the Raj Singh case the same Supreme Court had said UGC regulations are advisory, not binding. இங்க என்ன சொல்றாங்க, என்ன லாஜிக் கொடுக்குறாங்கன்னா, நீங்க சொல்றீங்க the rules and regulations are placed before the parliament. எப்படி பிளேஸ் பண்றாங்கன்னு பத்தி அவங்க டிஸ்கஸ் பண்ணல. பார்லிமெண்ட்ல பிளேஸ் பண்ணாலே பார்லிமெண்ட் ஒத்துக்கிட்ட மாதிரி, பார்லிமெண்ட் ஒத்துக்கிட்டா the rules become part of the parent act. No, parent act is clashing with the state act. So அப்படின்னு சொல்றாங்க. That argument is wrong. Then there were some more judgments in Kalyani Madhivanan versus KV Jairaj. December 2024 in PJ Dharmaraj versus Church of South India. If a recent 1 month before Supreme Court exactly opposite judgment கொடுக்குறான். என்ன கொடுக்குறான், அங்கே ஒரு தர்மராஜன் சொல்லி ஆளு, அவர் 60 ரிட்டையர்மெண்ட் ஏஜ். அவர் என்ன சொல்றாரு, யூஜிசி ரெகுலேஷன்ல 65 இருக்கு, ஸோ என்ன நீங்க 65ல தான் ரிட்டையர் பண்ணணும் அப்படிங்கிறாரு. தெலுங்கானா கவர்மெண்ட் சுப்ரீம் கோர்ட் என்ன சொல்லுது, கவர்மெண்ட் அந்த ரெகுலேஷனை ஒத்துக்கல, கவர்மெண்ட் ஒத்துக்கிட்டாதான் உனக்கு 65, கவர்மெண்ட் ஒத்துக்காத வரைக்கும் உனக்கு 60 தான், போயிட்டு வா அப்படின்னு சொல்லி அனுப்புறாங்க. நோ, சில கேஸ்ல சுப்ரீம் கோர்ட் சேஸ் யூஜிசி ரெகுலேஷன்ஸ் ஆர் binding. சில கேஸ்ல சுப்ரீம் கோர்ட் saying UGC regulations are not binding. Okay. Now, as I told you, sorry. Now the whole question is, rules and regulations parliament la vecha, do they become part of the parent act? The question. Okay, constitution அப்படி ஏதோ இருக்கா சொல்லுதா? No, nowhere does the constitution say if you place the rules and regulations before the parliament they become part of the parent act. And constitution இங்கே சொல்ல. General Clauses Act 1897, I don't want to go into that. It's a common act. There is things which are applicable to all acts. அதுல சொல்லிருப்பான். அதுலயும் எதுவும் மென்ஷன் இல்ல. பின்ன எப்படி நீங்க சுப்ரீம் கோர்ட்ல எப்படி சொல்றீங்க? மர்ஜ் ஆகுதுன்னு எப்படி சொல்றீங்க? In fact, the same Supreme Court in 1961, the same issue came up. Whether rules and regulations, when they are placed before the parliament, do they become part of the parent act? In 1961, in a case called Chief Inspector of Mines versus Corruption. Okay. On the case, the Supreme Court என்ன சொன்னா, no, it doesn't. Yeah. It contravenes the President and Chief Inspector of Mines versus Corruption Thapar, where the Supreme Court says the true position appears to be that the rules and regulations do not lose their character as rules and regulations, even though they are supposed to be of the same effect as if contained in the Act. They continue to be rules subordinate to the Act, though for certain purposes, including purpose of construction, they are to be treated as if contained in the Act. The true nature of subordinate rule is law. என்ன சொல்றானா, subordinate legislation will always be subordinate legislation. அடிமை, நீ அடிமையானா எப்பவுமே அடிமைதான். என்ன, you cannot, subordinate legislation merely being placed before the parliament doesn't become part of the parent act. அது என்னைக்குமே அடிமைதான் அப்படின்னு சொல்லி அவங்க. So at least Supreme Court should discuss this case. 61ல தாப்பர்ல அப்படி சொன்னாங்க, நாங்க அதை ஒத்துக்கல அப்படின்னு சொல்லி அதான் சொல்லியிருக்கணும். பட் they didn't do that. There's one more case, judgment Kerala Electricity Board versus Indian Aluminium Company 1975. Same issue came up. That is parliamental Vekranala. Do the rules become? And Anga Kuda Supreme Court said no. So now I come to the end of my talk. Let me sum up what I have to say. First point is UGC regulations are recommendatory, not mandatory. First point. Second point, UGC regulations on vice chancellors especially are ultra virus the UGC Act 1950. Ultra virus na அத்துமீறல். UGC Act la vice chancellor பத்தி எதுவுமே சொல்ல கிடையாது. நீ எப்படி இது கொண்டு வர? Third point, UGC regulations framed by 12 officials. UGC regulations framed by 12 officials cannot override the plenary state laws of 28 states. 28 ஸ்டேட்டோட லெஜிஸ்லேட்டிவ் அசம்பிளியோட இந்த 12 பேர் யூஜிசியில் உட்கார்ந்து அவங்கள ஓவர்ரைட் பண்ணிருக்க முடியாது. That makes a mockery of democracy. It makes a mockery of federalism. Fourth, delegated legislation under a central law cannot override a plenary state law in the concurrent list, Article 254. That is, the UGC regulation and university law is specific case. The broader principle is delegated legislation under any central law in the concurrent list cannot override the provisions of the state laws. That's the broader principle. Next funda, delegated legislation does not automatically become part of the parent act unless laid under affirmative resolution procedure. That is, parliament conscious on the rules and discuss பண்ணி approved அப்படின்னு சொன்னாதா தவிர சும்மா அந்த in place for information 30 நாளுக்குள்ள ஏதோ சொல்லாட்டி அந்த சிஸ்டம்ல எல்லாம் வச்சா it is not considered. UGC regulation அப்படிதான் நம்ம வைக்கிறோம், 30 days வைக்கிறோம். Most people don't even read it. இந்த மாதிரி வச்சிருக்கானே தெரியாது இந்த இதுல. Due to conflicting judgments, a definitive ruling by a constitutional bench of the Supreme Court is imperative. Constitutional bench are minimum 5 judges. ஒன்னு இப்படி ஒன்னு அப்படி மாத்தி மாத்தி இவங்க சொன்னனால ஒரே குழப்பமா இருக்கு. நம்ம கவுண்டர் பண்ணி சொன்ன மாதிரி ஒண்ணுமே புரியல, ஒரே குழப்பமா இருக்குங்கிற மாதிரி. So the Supreme Court must இன்னொரு இஷ்டத்துக்கு அடிச்சு விடக்கூடாது. They must constitute a 5-member bench and give a proper ruling. Then the last point I'm saying is, which I already told you, no chancellor's nominee or UGC nominee. This is what the teachers associations and others should be fighting for. That is, UGC nominee, leave universities to run their affairs themselves. The companies are not MD of HCL or MD of Infosys appointed by the executive council. If Harvard University can appoint its own president, Oxford can appoint its university's governing body, can appoint its own. Why can't we move towards that? I mean, not immediately, maybe, but we should move towards it. First, ಇವನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಕಲ್ಟಿಬಿಡಿ. Chancellor nominee வேണ്ട, UGC nominee வேണ്ട. In fact, I would say there should be 3 nominees, one from the syndicate, one from the academic council, one from the Senate. சரி, இது ரொம்ப இன்பிரீடிங் ஆகுது. அட்லீஸ்ட் ஒரு ஆளு வெளியில இருக்கிறோம் சொன்னா, ஓகே, ஒன் அவுட்ஸ்டாண்டிங் academician nominated by the state government, not by the chancellor. So the best thing would be, according to me, one nominee of the Senate syndicate, one nominee of the Senate, one nominee of the state government. This is the best thing. Now, I have talked only about the UGC regulations in so far as the concerning vice chancellor. There are so many things wrong with those draft 2015 regulations. I leave it to the other speakers to deal with them. நானே எல்லா பேசி முடிக்க வேண்டாம்னு பார்த்தேன், இப்போ ரொம்ப நீளமாயிருச்சு. So I thank you for your patient hearing, and I thank IDRM for inviting me.